Anthropology lecture, lecture 32 on Egyptian religion. We're going to take a look at the general features of Egyptian religion. Keep in mind, general implies very broad. There'll be a lot of differences over time. So ancient Egyptian religion in the beginning, in the pre-dynastic period, won't be the same as at the end. And there are, of course, lots of variations that we could look at in something as complex as Egyptian religion. So this is going to be a very broad introduction to the topic. If you look at the broad features of Egyptian religion and mythology, um, one of the things, of course, you'll notice, and many people, it's the first thing they learn about ancient Egyptian religion, is that the deities are representations of inanimate forces like order or disorder, but also natural creatures. So it's not unusual for the Egyptians to take a force of human existence and then personify it as a deity, as well as just say a cat or a crocodile or a hippo. The flood of the Nile can be personified. So this is very much a people who take the world around them and emphasize the potential for that to be a deity, for that to reflect a supernatural force. Confusingly, ancient Egyptian deities change form. They merge with other deities. Their body parts can have independent functions. Texts talk about, for example, the eye of Re ranging far and wide as if it's its own creature or its own independent existence. So sometimes it gets really confusing that the Egyptians don't seem to have a consistent way of looking at each deity, with each deity having only one job or one function and one physical form. Get used to the idea of multiplicity of forms and those forms changing in different contexts. Egyptian deities, in some ways, aren't limited, I think, by the idea of humans having one form, one name, one identity. They really do function as deities that are beyond the human concept of what a god could be. Deities don't have personal relationships with humans in the same way as you see in Christianity or other religions, where the deity comes to live in your heart or in your life and has a relationship with you. The ancient Egyptian deities do interact with humans. Many of them are benevolent towards humans. Humans call on these deities for help and aid and comfort. But some deities can also be quite nasty and quite mean in their relationships with humanity. But it's not a personal relationship of living inside a human being, as in many religions. So humans in ancient Egypt will certainly call on the deities for aid, call on the deities to help them understand what's going on. But many times the ancient Egyptians will resort to magic in the form of spells, in the form of small amulets or statuettes that are used to invoke the help or the aid of this deity. Ancient Egyptians have no chief religious text. There's no ancient Egyptian Bible. Now, there are plenty of texts. Religious texts do abound in ancient Egypt, but no standard one that everyone can go to and check the true religion, check the official religion. So it's quite different than, say, a religion like Christianity. Now, that shouldn't imply that there aren't beliefs or there aren't ethical standards, because clearly the ancient Egyptians have those. Beliefs are expressed in lots of different texts. Ethical standards are expressed. It's just that these aren't collected in a single setting. State religion and private worship were not the same thing. So people worshiped in their own way, and the state had its own religion. But of course, they do overlap, and the people do take part in the state religion. But what people do at home will not necessarily be a state-centered worship. So there's a multiplicity of forms of worship in ancient Egypt. We've only already mentioned to some degree creation in ancient Egypt and the ways in which Egyptians considered how the world came to be. Um, the story of Atum is one of the oldest of the stories, emerging out of water, creating all things, as we've seen. Atum being embodying both male and female principles, was able to bring about all the other gods and the things in the world. Doing this through the bringing of order out of chaos required Atum to use Sia, foresight, Hu, authority, and Heka, or magic. And you can see here, these are personifications of inanimate ideas being turned into deities, or what the Romans would call noumena, divine spirits. Later versions of these stories combine Atum with the god Re, the god Amun, and so you will see variations of this story of Atum as Atum Re or Amun Re, and various other forms of these gods combined together. By the time of the Egyptian New Kingdom, Amun will become the leading state god and will be seen as the force behind which all of creation happens. Amun's name means the hidden one. And so hiding behind these gods was this force that brought about creation. There is another set of stories about creation involving two other gods, Ptah and Num. Ptah is a divine craftsman who speaks the world into existence through the word. He crafts the world into existence. Num is a potter. And so Num's role is primarily the crafting of bodies, putting together human bodies on his potter's wheel. And so this set of ideas takes a different, shift in thinking about creation, whereas Atum creates the world essentially through masturbation, so it's a sexual act. Ta is creating through the word, through crafting. So it's an intellectual bit, while Num is crafting literally on the potter's wheel, which is a much more down-to-earth metaphor for creation. All of this will come to an end at some point. So the Egyptians do believe that there is an end to the world. The world will return to chaos when Atum is weary of the world as it is and seeks to return everything back to the watery primeval chaos from which it originated. Here's an image of that watery existence being watered by two deities as the sun rises. So you can see the top of the image here. This is the horizon and the sun coming up over it. Re, the sun god, is seen as one of the important gods at creation. the sun rising above the waters, is an important idea that the Egyptians think is recreated every day in the sun's rising. So it's this continual cycle of rebirth from death and life. As Ray travels through the sky during the day, sails through the underworld, defeats the forces of evil, only to rise again. Part of the defeating of the forces of evil is the killing of the great serpent Apophis, or Apep in Egyptian. It's Apepi in Egyptian. And here is Re in the form of a great cat killing the serpent in order that the sun god may continue through the underworld and come out victorious to rise again. So you can see from a lot of this imagery that the Egyptians had a very cyclical view of time, a cyclical view of existence. Cycles are incredibly important. Cycles of the flood, cycles of the sun rising and setting. So time is both linear in Egypt. Sacred time is both linear but also cyclical. As I already mentioned, there is definitely a state religion, the religion of the king, the religion of the priesthood, and these major gods that we think of for ancient Egypt. In that state religion, there were certainly temples, but we shouldn't think of them as we think of houses of worship today, where people gather every week and they sing and they shake hands and they read some sacred scriptures, and then they get down on their knees and pray. Temples were not for ordinary worship of the common people. Temples were really houses of the gods, mansions of eternity that connected the earth, the physical earth, with a sacred cosmos. And so in many cases, these temples are in their design reflections of a sacred cosmos. You have to be able to read the temple as a recreation of the sacred world through the way the temple is set up and the way various imagery in the temple is designed. So it's not a place that ordinary people go and walk in the door and, shake hands with the priest and sing a song or two and then go home. These are incredibly sacred spaces for the state religion to perform its functions, which essentially are caring for and feeding the god inside. So every day there are rituals associated with caring for the shrine of the god deep inside the temple, making sure the god is fed and purified and made happy by the priesthood who enact all these rituals and roles. Some of the priests keep the calendars. Some of the priests do the actual day-to-day caring of the god. You can see a priest here on the side with his very fancy leopard skin wrapped around him. Priests themselves were very fastidious, very clean people, shaving their body hair, keeping themselves very clean, because they were in the presence of the divine. And you don't do that when you are dirty. You can't be dirty and come into the presence of the holy one of that temple. This divine image would be hidden from public view, so it's not something ordinary people get to go look at, as we might look at today statuary in a church. The divine image could come out, but it would usually be transported in a special shrine and still remain hidden from the people. These temples often grew because the various kings throughout ancient Egypt would add to them to show their piety. The case of Hatshepsut, to showcase her connection to the divine, and the fact that she is the daughter of Amun. So these temples grow over time. They get new courts, new shrines, new halls, new additions to them, where the king is showing off just how pious he or she is. The temples also were connected to the state through their own estates. You can't feed and care for a priesthood and a temple without money. And so temples had their own country estates to grow food and provide wealth to maintain the temple. So just as the king had his own estates, where people contributed to the support of the king and the state, temples did as well. We know that both men and women could serve inside these temples. Men dominated most of the priesthoods. Women could serve, though. A priest is a hem necher. Woman is hemet necher. Many women serve in lots of roles related to ritual singing and dancing in these temples. In some cases, the women might perform sexual roles, so they act out recreation and reproduction through their roles in the temple. And you see this in many ancient cultures in which women have a role because of their ability to give birth. So, drawing of a temple, you would see on the outside giant pylons, as these are called, large areas to showcase images of the gods, the king. Um, Many of the temples had flags or banners or pennants to wave proudly in front of the temple. You might see an obelisk, um, it's essentially an elongated pyramid with a very long bottom on it. These obelisks set up to honor the gods or the king. Inside there would be courtyards, sacrifices could be performed um, for the god inside. Farther inside, there would be a shrine, sacred shrine for the actual god, the statue of the god himself or herself. Sometimes these temples had sacred lakes nearby, since water, of course, had a very important role in ancient Egypt, the Nile, the primeval waters from which everything emerged. Since ordinary people didn't have access to the inner areas of the temple, they had their own private or popular religion, which was part of their getting by on a day-to-day basis. Making sure that the gods were happy so that your child didn't get sick or that your fields prospered. The kind of ordinary things that people care about as they're trying to make their way through their lives. Ordinary folks could interact with the gods in lots of different ways. Um, they could make offerings outside of the temples in special areas where you might see statuettes set up with a person's name on it dedicated to a god. Many places where gods promoted healing, you'll find giant, what appears to be piles of broken body parts. As people are coming to beg for healing from a particular god, they might bring an arm cast in, clay, or a leg or another body part that they will ritualistically, smash to break the hold of some evil power on them, or leave with a prayer to say, help me, my arm is, in trouble. So, oh, please God, I'm going to leave this little arm here to remember that you can remember me by and remember my prayer by. So those are kinds of ordinary activities you see for people in relation to temples. The gods interacted with people in dreams, and so you find frequent dreams in ancient Egypt where the gods speak to people. Shrines and homes are the most common day-to-day way that people interact with deities, where your house have a particular shrine set up to worship your ancestors like the Ahu, or maybe a local deity that was important in your town or your community. And ordinary people interacted with the gods through the harm inflicted by demons or mischievous deities that made your children sick or spoiled food. And so there were lots of ways to interact with those deities to protect yourself through amulets that would ward off evil, um, spells, and all kinds of other ways that people try to make their individual lives better on a day-to-day basis by, appealing to the gods or praying for protection from some evil force that is threatening your life. Part of the religious calendar in ancient Egypt was a cycle of festivals, and there are several festivals that are important in ancient Egypt. We're going to talk about one. Um, these were these were occasions for public celebration of the major gods. Um, the people still did not have access to the temple in the same way as the important priests and the king did, but they did get to interact with the god in a public setting, even if that god was hidden from view. Many of these festivals enacted cycles of rebirth and renewal for the gods. So it was a yearly cycle of regeneration or retelling a myth or a story that enabled that god's functions to continue in the new year. For ordinary folks, beyond the actual religious aspects, many of these festivals were occasions for extraordinarily wild public drunkenness, feasting, and even wild sexual activity. Um, so they're places and times for people to release all kinds of pent up energies and desires in a publicly acceptable or publicly okay way. One such festival is Opet. Opet is a feast, festival in the season of Aket, the season of the inundation. Um, and it's for about 11 days, though actually it gets extended at one point to about 27 days late in Egyptian history. Um, in this particular festival, the shrine of the god, which was sort of like a portable box that was carried into public. Egyptologists call them a barque, B-A-R-Q-U-E. This particular shrine holding the god Amun, the hidden one, would leave the sanctuary at Karnak, the temple at Karnak, and process to a smaller temple at Luxor, not too far away. And then, of course, would return back to Karnak at the end of the festival. Um, Festival rites or rituals included ceremonies to ensure the fertility of the land, to ensure the fertility and the power of the king who would take place in Opet. And of course, the people would get a chance to see the bark and celebrate as it traveled through the processional way. And it would be a great excuse, to have a great time and get drunk and celebrate the ritual of the year in this season of Akhet, the season of the flood, um, where the Nile is, showing that um, that the ceremony is the ceremony of life is being renewed, and the ability to plant and enjoy the bounty of harvest is coming, as long as, of course, the Nile is having a good flood that year. So you can see how these festivals are connected with cycles of rebirth and renewal, and provide opportunities for ordinary people to get out and have a good time. See illustrations of the bark being carried. So the shrine, this portable shrine, the god sits inside. You can see the tail end of the bark here and another image, followed by these people accompanying. Um, This is an aerial view of Karnak, two aerial views here. You can see one with from different directions with the sacred lake here, the pylons, giant pylons. Um, from the back side here, you can see all of these pillared hallways in this deep interior section. Karnak is so huge, enormous, because it's one of the favorite places for the Egyptian kings to keep adding to. We'll add another hall, we'll add another temple, we'll add another side location. So I can showcase just how much I love the gods. And yay, look at me, I'm awesome. Here's an artist recreation of the bark leaving Karnak. And I like this recreation too because it shows you that the temples would have been highly decorated and colored, as opposed to the way we see them today when they've lost a lot of their pigments. That's been an overview of Egyptian religion. Keep in mind, this is very broad. Every period historically will have its own features, and there'll be some differences as the religion evolves over time. And we could dive into a great more detail about various aspects of the deities, the temples, the priests, etc. So this has been quite broad in its approach.